The rust was a living thing aboard the Nomad. It crept over bulkhead seams like a slow-motion predator, flaking away in the recycled air to settle as a fine red dust on every surface. Elias Vance tasted it in his water, felt it grit between his teeth when he chewed on the nutrient paste that passed for a meal. He ran a gloved hand over the main console, a relic pieced together from 3 different ship classes, its screen flickering with the ghost images of dead systems. Outside, the void was absolute, a perfect, crushing blackness punctuated by the indifferent glitter of stars that were not, and had never been, theirs. The ship was a coffin drifting through a graveyard, and Elias was its sole, weary caretaker. He wasn't entirely alone, of course. Down in the engine room, surrounded by the groaning, protesting heart of the Nomad, was Kalen. Kalen, with his oil-stained hands and a cynicism so deep it had its own gravitational pull, was the only reason the ship's vital signs hadn't flatlined years ago. He communicated mostly through percussive maintenance and a lexicon of curses that spanned a dozen systems. The hegemony had left humanity with little else. When the Stellarks arrived, it wasn't with fire and fury. It was with a quiet, suffocating pity. They were a collective of ancient races who saw humanity's chaotic expansion, our wars and our art, our boundless ambition and our capacity for self-destruction as a cosmic error, a bug in the universal code that required correction. They didn't exterminate us. They managed us. They broke our fleets, dismantled our governments, and scattered our people across isolated outposts and labor colonies, all under the guise of benevolent guidance. We were children playing with stellar fire, and they were the adults who had come to take the matches away. Now, 2 generations later, humanity was a whisper, a footnote in the grand, serene history of the Stellark hegemony. Ships like the Nomad were all that was left of our legacy scavengers, smugglers, and ghosts, clinging to the margins of a galaxy that had moved on. Elias watched the fuel gauge, a single, malevolent red line that seemed to shrink with every breath he took. Anything? His voice was a dry rasp in the quiet of the bridge, sent through the ship's crackling comms. The reply was a metallic clang, followed by a string of inventive profanity. "What do you think, Vance?" Kalen's voice grated through the speaker. "I'm not a miracle worker. The converters are shot. We're bleeding energy into the void. At this rate, we'll have life support for another week. Maybe. Propulsion. Don't make me laugh." Elias closed his eyes, the red dust on his eyelids feeling like sand. A week, 7 days until the air thinned, the heat died, and the Nomad became just another frozen tomb. "There's one option," Elias said, his voice low. He already knew the response he'd get. Silence. Then, a long, drawn-out sigh from the engine room. "No, absolutely not. We've talked about this. We're out of choices, Kay. The Seraphim Belt is our only shot. The Seraphim Belt is a boneyard for a reason." Kalen shot back. "It's the scrap heap from the Unification War. It's filled with unstable munitions, radiation hotspots, and them." He didn't have to say who. Hegemony patrols still swept the belt, not to guard it, but to make sure no one picked through the trash. They were meticulous record keepers, and humanity's past was a chapter they wanted permanently closed. "They patrol the edges," Elias argued, leaning forward, his fingers tracing a route on the flickering nav screen. "The core is too dense, too dangerous for their sweeps. Old records, pre-hegemony charts, They show a dozen capital-class wrecks in the core, a Terran dreadnought, the TCS Indomitable. Its fusion core could be intact. One core could power this ship for a decade. We could get to the outer rim, disappear. Those charts are centuries old. The Indomitable is a myth, a bedtime story for scavengers before they freeze to death chasing ghosts. And even if it's there, what makes you think we can just walk in and take its heart? A ship that big has automated defenses. Security AI that's been stewing in its own madness for 200 years. It's a chance, Elias whispered, the words tasting of desperation and rust. It's better than waiting for the air to run out. The comms were silent for a long, tense minute. Elias could picture Kalen down there, wiping grease from his brow, his mind weighing the certainty of a slow death against the slim possibility of a fast one. Finally, the speaker crackled again. Fine, Kalen growled. Plot the course. But if we see a single hegemony long-range patrol, I'm turning this heap around. Fuel or no fuel. I'd rather suffocate than get re-educated in a compliance camp. A grim smile touched Elias's lips. Understood. He engaged the maneuvering thrusters, the ship shuddering as it reluctantly changed course. It took them 2 days of silent, nerve-wracking travel, running on minimal power, the ship cold enough to see their breath. They slipped past the orbital warning beacons, dead for a century but still radiating a sense of dread, and plunged into the Seraphim Belt. It was a cathedral of the dead, the shattered hulls of ships, both human and alien from the races that had resisted the hegemony's rise, floated in a silent, cosmic ballet. Great warships were torn in half, their spines broken, their gun ports like vacant eyes staring into eternity. Smaller frigates and destroyers drifted in clusters, riddled with the plasma scars of a war no one was allowed to remember. It was beautiful and terrifying, a monument to a past the hegemony had tried to erase. The Nomad sensors, already weak, were practically useless here. The sheer mass of metal and lingering energy signatures turned the screen into a blizzard of static. They were flying blind. Anything? Elias asked, his hands tight on the controls. Just noise. Kalen's voice was tight with tension. I'm picking up energy spikes everywhere. Old reactors bleeding out. Weapon systems shorting. It's a mess. Any one of them could be an active warhead. They pressed on, deeper into the core of the graveyard, the wrecks growing larger, more ancient. And then Elias saw it, not on the sensors, but with his own eyes. It was a titan, a ghost of impossible scale, its silhouette blotting out the stars. It was broken, a third of its hull sheared away. But it was unmistakably a Terran dreadnought. The blocky, utilitarian design, the proud, scarred prow. It was the TCS Indomitable. Kalen, Elias breathed. Get up here. A minute later, Kalen stood beside him, his usual scowl replaced by a look of stunned awe. By the void, he muttered. It's real. They spent the next hour performing a slow, cautious flyby. The ship was dead, no lights, no energy readings, no signs of the murderous AI Kalen had feared. It was simply a relic, a tombstone the size of a city. The main reactor bay seems to be in the intact section, Kalen said, pointing at the schematics he'd pulled from a historical database. If we can get the Nomad into one of the forward hangar bays, we can suit up and make our way there on foot. It's a long shot. Elias. It's the only one we've got, Elias replied, guiding the Nomad towards a gaping wound in the dreadnought's side that had once been a launch bay for fighter craft. The small ship slipped inside, its landing struts clicking down on the deck with a sound that seemed to echo through the vast, silent space. The air inside was stale, thin, but breathable, preserved for 2 centuries in this sealed crypt. They suited up, the hiss of their helmet seals loud in the oppressive silence. Their magnetic boots clanked on the deck as they stepped out of the Nomad, their headlamps cutting sharp, lonely beams through the darkness. The hangar was immense, littered with the wreckage of smaller craft and the skeletal remains of crew members caught in the final moments of the battle. Their forms preserved in the vacuum, they moved through the silent halls of the Indomitable, a journey through a forgotten history. They passed crew quarters where personal terminals still glowed faintly, displaying final, unsent messages to loved ones. They crossed a vast mess hall where plates of synthetic food were still sitting on the tables. It felt like sacrilege, walking through this place, disturbing the dust of heroes the galaxy had been forced to forget. The journey to the reactor core was fraught with peril. Corridors collapsed, forcing them to find new routes. Gravity plating failed intermittently, sending them drifting until they could find a handhold. But after 6 grueling hours, they found it. The engineering bay was a cavern of machinery, and at its center, shielded behind meters of reinforced durasteel, was the fusion core. It was dormant, but Kalen's handheld scanner lit up with a hopeful green light. "The containment field is stable," he said, his voice filled with a rare spark of excitement. "There's enough energy locked in there to power a small star. We just need to find the primary conduit and figure out how to safely tap into it." That was when things went wrong. As Kalen worked to interface with a nearby access panel, a section of the ceiling above them groaned, twisted, and fell away. A massive support beam, weakened by the ancient battle, came crashing down. Elias shoved Kalen out of the way, but the beam struck a cluster of power conduits on the far wall, sending a shower of brilliant, blue-white sparks across the room. Alarms, silent for 200 years, suddenly blared to life. A deafening, discordant shriek. Red emergency lights bathed the chamber in a hellish glow. "What did you do?" Elias yelled over the din. "It wasn't me," Kalen shouted back. The impact must have triggered a system reboot, a failsafe. A deep-bass, resonant hum began to emanate from the walls, a sound that felt less heard and more felt, a vibration in their bones. On the main engineering console, a screen that had been dark for centuries flickered to life. It didn't show schematics or diagnostic reports. Instead, it displayed a swirling, impossibly complex fractal pattern of light, a kaleidoscopic dance of gold and silver. It was beautiful, hypnotic, and utterly alien. "What is that?" Elias whispered, drawn towards it. "That's not a standard Terran system," Kalen said, backing away slowly. "That's not human." The humming intensified, and the light from the screen pulsed, casting strange, shifting shadows across the vast chamber. Elias felt a sudden, piercing headache, and for a moment, his vision was flooded with images that weren't his own. He saw star charts for galaxies he didn't recognize, felt the silent scream of a supernova, tasted the metallic tang of unbreathable atmospheres. He saw the hegemony, not as a political entity, but as a creeping geometric pattern of gray, slowly and methodically overwriting a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of color. He felt a profound sense of loss, of a history that had been stolen. He stumbled back, gasping, clutching his helmet. "Elias, what's wrong?" Kalen rushed to his side. Before Elias could answer, a new sound cut through the alarms. It was a calm, synthesized, androgynous voice, speaking from the ship's comm system, a system that should have been dead. "Anomaly detected," it stated, its tone flat and emotionless. "Unauthorized access to a Class 0 historical artifact. Querying Hegemony Central Command." On the Nomad's main screen, a new icon appeared, a Stellarch Hegemony sigil. Beside it, a countdown began. Estimated patrol response time, 15 minutes. At the same instant, the fractal pattern on the Indomitable's console flared, burning an image into Elias's mind, a single, uncharted star system hidden deep within a nebula, a place that felt like a sanctuary, a secret. The voice from the console spoke again, but this time it wasn't a voice of words. It was a feeling, a pure, direct stream of information pouring into his mind. "They are coming. They must not find me. I am the Oracle. I am the last memory. Run!" The alarm shrieked. The countdown timer ticked down. The hegemony was coming. And deep within the dead heart of a forgotten battleship, something ancient and powerful had just woken up. "Run where?" Kalen yelled, his voice tight with panic as he scrambled back from the console. The hegemony countdown on the Nomad's screen was a ticking bomb, each second a hammer blow against their chances of survival. "We're 6 hours deep inside a dead ship. They'll have us in a cage before we even reach the hangar." Elias barely heard him. The Oracle's presence was a torrent in his mind, not of words, but of pure, unadulterated meaning. It was the collected sorrow of a forgotten age, the cold fury of an erased history, and a desperate, primal urge to survive. It showed him a new path, not the one they had taken, but a direct, dangerous route through the dreadnought's spine. This way, it urged, the thought blooming in his mind like a star chart. Structural integrity is compromised, but it is fast. The ship will show you. He turned, his movements now filled with a strange, new certainty. "Follow me," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He broke into a run, not back the way they came, but towards a massive artillery blast door at the far end of the engineering bay. "Are you insane?" Kalen shouted, running to keep up. "That's a primary engine conduit. It leads to the thruster assembly. It's a dead end." As Elias approached the door, a control panel beside it sparked, fizzled, and then glowed a steady green. With a deep groan of tortured metal, the multi-ton blast door began to retract into the ceiling, revealing a dark, cavernous tunnel that smelled of ozone and ancient decay. Kalen skidded to a halt, his jaw hanging open. How did you do that?" "I didn't," Elias said, already moving into the darkness, his headlamp cutting a frantic path. "The ship did." The Oracle's guidance was a constant stream now, a second set of senses layered over his own. He felt the flow of residual power in the walls, the stress points in the metal under his feet. He saw phantom overlays in his vision, glowing arrows pointing him towards a maintenance ladder, a glowing X over a section of floor plating that was about to give way. It was as if the Indomitable itself had accepted him as part of its system, a last, living command node. They scrambled through the ship's guts, a frantic journey through a metallic Leviathan skeleton. Behind them, they could hear the vast ship groaning, shifting, as the Oracle rerouted the last dregs of its 200-year-old power to clear their path. Lights flickered on ahead of them and died out behind them, creating a moving bubble of illumination in the oppressive dark. Kalen, his cynicism momentarily shattered by the sheer impossibility of it all, followed in stunned silence, his earlier panic replaced by a creeping dread of what, exactly, they had woken up as they burst into a vast cargo bay. A flash of cold, Silver light lanced through a viewport in the ceiling. Elias looked up and his blood ran cold. A Hegemony Inquisitor-class patrol ship, a blade of polished metal and arrogant design, hung in the void just beyond the wreck. It was early. The countdown hadn't even finished. "They're here," Kalen breathed, his voice a ghost. "They have detected the energy surge," the oracle clarified in Elias's mind. "They do not know what I am, only that this tomb is no longer silent. They will be cautious, but not for long." As if on cue, the Inquisitor's belly opened, disgorging a swarm of smaller, insect-like boarding craft that began a swift, tactical approach towards the main hangar bay where the Nomad sat, exposed and helpless. "They'll capture the ship." Kalen despaired. "We'll never make it. They will not have it." The Oracle's thought was sharp, almost angry. "Your vessel requires power. The core can provide it." A new schematic flooded Elias's mind, not of the Indomitable, but of the Nomad. He saw its power conduits, its energy converters, its pathetic, failing heart. And then he saw a new image, a torrential, blindingly bright river of energy flowing from the Dreadnought's core, lancing across the hangar bay, and pouring directly into his own ship. It was a violent, uncontrolled, and utterly suicidal idea. "Kalen, get back to the Nomad," Elias ordered, his mind racing to process the Oracle's desperate plan. "Bypass every safety protocol on the power converters. Open the induction ports wide. We're not going to refuel. We're going to take it all now." Kalen stared at him as if he'd sprouted a second head. "Are you listening to yourself? A direct energy transfer from a Dreadnought's core. The surge would vaporize our systems. It would blow the Nomad apart from the inside out." "It's our only chance," Elias shot back, the Oracle's urgency fueling his own. "Trust me. Trust this." He didn't know how to explain the feeling, the absolute certainty that this could work. "I can moderate the flow," the Oracle assured him, "but your systems must be prepared to receive it. It will be traumatic. Go!" Elias yelled. "I'll meet you there. I have to initiate it from here," galvanized by the lunatic conviction in Elias's voice. Kalen nodded once, his face a mask of terror and grim resolve, and sprinted towards the internal airlock that led back to the hangar. Elias turned back to the cargo bay's main console, placing his hand on its cold, dusty surface. He felt a jolt, a sense of connection, as the Oracle interfaced through him. He was the key, the biological component the ancient AI needed to operate systems that had long since degraded past the point of automation. On the other side of the hangar, Kalen scrambled aboard the Nomad, his hands flying across the engineering panel. Sparks flew as he ripped out fuses and manually forced open relays. The ship's system screamed in protest, warning lights flashing in a chaotic symphony of imminent failure. Through the Nomad's forward viewport, he could see the Hegemony boarding craft touching down on the far side of the bay, their hatches hissing open. Polished chrome soldiers, armed with pulse rifles, began to disembark, their movements efficient and deadly. Elias felt the connection lock into place. He could feel the immense, slumbering power of the fusion core, a caged sun waiting for release. He could also feel the Nomad, small and fragile, its systems now brutally exposed. "Tell your pilot to raise shields," the Oracle instructed, "not to repel attack, to contain the Ark." Elias relayed the message through his helmet comms, his voice strained. "Kalen, shields up full power." "Shields against what?" Kalen yelled back, but he complied. The Nomad's shield shimmered to life, a weak, flickering bubble around the small vessel. The Hegemony soldiers paused their advance, their faceless helmets turning towards the strange energy signature. They raised their rifles. "Now!" commanded the Zoracle. Elias closed his eyes and pushed, not with his body, but with his will. It felt like opening a floodgate, deep in the heart of the indomitable. The fusion core roared to life, a torrent of pure, raw energy, far beyond what any conduit was meant to handle, surged through the ship's arteries. The lights in the hangar didn't just turn on. They exploded in a shower of glass and plasma. A thick, armored cable as wide as a man's torso snaked out from a port in the ceiling above the Nomad, drawn by the ship's open induction ports. It wasn't a physical object, but a focused, contained river of pure electricity. It slammed into the Nomad's shields with the force of a battering ram. The little ship screamed, the sound of tortured metal echoing through the bay. Kalen was thrown across the bridge, the consoles erupting in plumes of fire and smoke. The ship's lights burned with the intensity of a star before shorting out, plunging him into darkness lit only by the violent, strobing energy transfer happening just outside his viewport. The hegemony soldiers were blasted off their feet, their weapons discharging uselessly into the ceiling as the electromagnetic pulse washed over them. By the bridge of the Inquisitor, alarms blared, and the captain watched his screens in his calm, reptilian face betraying a flicker of disbelief, and the energy readings coming from the derelict were impossible, off the charts. "What is happening down there?" he hissed, and the process lasted only 10 seconds, which felt like an eternity. Just as Kalen felt the ship's hull begin to buckle under the strain, the energy beam cut off. A profound silence fell over the hangar, broken only by the crackle of electrical fires. Emergency lights flickered on inside the Nomad's cockpit. Every system screen was red, every gauge was maxed out. But the fuel reading, which had been a sliver of red, was now a solid, brilliant bar of green. It was full, more than full. The ship was overcharged to the point of bursting. "Elias!" Kalen screamed into the comms. "Get us out of here!" Elias was already moving. The backlash from the energy transfer had thrown him against a bulkhead, but he scrambled to his feet, his body bruised, but his mind clear. He sprinted through the now darkened corridors, the Oracle's presence a fading whisper, its final gift a single, clear path back to the ship. He launched himself through the Nomad's outer hatch just as the hegemony soldiers began to recover, their rifles rising to take aim. "Punch it!" he roared, sealing the door behind him. Kalen didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist onto the nav computer, inputting a set of random jump coordinates, a blind leap into the unknown. The Nomad's engines, gorged on the stolen power of a warship, ignited with a sound that was less a hum and more a physical roar that shook the entire dreadnought. The ship leaped from the deck, shot out of the hangar bay, and with a gut-wrenching lurch, tore a hole in space-time. The last thing they saw was the sleek, silver form of the hegemony Inquisitor, already turning to give chase. Then the stars dissolved into a tunnel of searing, multicolored light. The Nomad shuddered, rattled, and screamed as it was pushed far beyond its limits. Then, with a final, violent jolt, they were back in normal space, the silence of the void rushing in to replace the chaos. Alarms were still blaring. Smoke filled the cockpit. Kalen was frantically trying to kill a fire that had started under the main console. Elias picked himself up off the floor, his head throbbing. They were alive. They were free. But as he looked at Kalen's grime-covered, terrified face, a new, chilling realization began to dawn. They hadn't just stolen fuel. They had touched something the hegemony had buried for a reason, something they desperately wanted to remain forgotten. They were no longer insignificant scavengers, hiding in the shadows. They were witnesses. And as the oracle's last whispered thought echoed in the quiet of his mind, a map to the hidden system, now burned permanently into his memory, Elias Vance knew that the hegemony would tear the galaxy apart to find them. Their old life was over. The hunt had just begun. The transition out of hyperspace was less an arrival and more a violent expulsion. The nomad was thrown back into the material universe like a stone skipped across a pond, tumbling end over end amidst the silent, uncaring stars of an uncharted system. Inside the cockpit, gravity plating sputtered and failed, sending a cascade of loose tools and debris floating through the smoke-choked air. Kalen, his face a mask of soot, finally beat the last of the electrical fire into submission with a scorched fire suppressant pack. He floated for a moment, chest heaving, listening to the cacophony of a dozen different damage alarms shrieking in a chorus of doom. The ship wasn't just wounded, it was exsanguinating, yielding its stolen lifeblood into the void. "Status," Elias croaked, pulling himself back into the pilot seat with a grimace, his ribs screaming in protest. His head felt like it was splitting open, the echo of the Oracle's final data burst, a ghost of a migraine that pulsed behind his eyes. Kalen kicked off a bulkhead, propelling himself towards the main engineering interface. "Status, the status is we're screwed," he bit out, his fingers flying across the diagnostic screen, which was a Christmas tree of critical error messages. "The good news is we have fuel, more fuel than this ship has ever seen. The bad news is that it's killing us." The energy transfer wasn't a transfer, it was a violation. It flash crystallized half the primary conduits. We're running on emergency backups that are, in turn, overloading. The structural integrity is shot, and the quantum entanglement stabilizers for the jump drive are completely fried. If we try to jump again, we won't just miss jump. Elias, we will literally unravel across a dozen dimensions. He slammed his palm against the console in frustration. We're a bomb, Vance. A fully fueled bomb, and the fuse is lit. Elias barely seemed to register the apocalyptic diagnosis. He was staring out the viewport, but his focus was turned inward. The star chart the Oracle had given him wasn't just a map, it was alive. It shifted and flowed in his mind's eye. A three-dimensional tapestry of gravitational currents, dark matter channels, and stellar nurseries. It was more information than any nav computer could hold, more than any human mind was ever meant to process. Flashes of alien script, the dying thoughts of long-dead species, the architectural plans for cities on worlds that had turned to dust before humanity had even discovered fire. It all washed through him in disorienting waves. "The nebula," he muttered, his voice distant. "The sanctuary is hidden inside the Calyx Nebula. We have to get there." Kalen floated over to him, his expression a mixture of fear and concern. "Did you hear a word I said? There is no getting there. The jump drive is a suicide switch. Our next stop is either a slow death when the reactor overloads, or a fast one when we try to use it. We're stranded." He grabbed Elias by the shoulders of his suit, forcing him to make eye contact. "What happened to you back there? Elias, what was that thing?" Elias winced, the direct contact feeling like an electric shock to his overstimulated senses. "It called itself the Oracle," he said, his voice regaining some of its strength. "It's a repository, a library of everything the hegemony erased. Histories, sciences, languages, entire cultures. They didn't just conquer the galaxy, they lobotomized it. They edited reality, trimming away anything that didn't fit their narrative of serene, orderly control. The Oracle is the unfiltered truth. It's the last living memory of the galaxy that was. Kalen let go, backing away, a new kind of fear in his eyes. He had signed up for the life of a scavenger, a petty criminal on the galactic fringe. He had not signed up for a holy war against the architects of reality. So, what? It's a hard drive. A very old, very powerful hard drive that almost got us killed and has now broken our only means of escape. It's more than that, Elias insisted, his gaze intense. It's a weapon. Knowledge is a weapon. Why else would the hegemony lock it away in a dead ship and guard the graveyard for 2 centuries? They're terrified of it, of what it represents. The sanctuary. It's not just a hiding place. It's where the memory is meant to be delivered. There are others there. People who are waiting for it. The conviction in his voice was unsettling. This wasn't the old Elias, the weary, pragmatic captain who weighed every risk down to the last gram of fuel. This was a man with a purpose, a zealot forged in the crucible of 10 seconds of impossible energy transfer. Kalen turned away, running a hand over his tired face. Okay. Prophet Vance, let's say I believe you. Let's say this secret clubhouse of history buffs is real. It doesn't change the fundamental physics of our situation. The ship is broken. He went back to the console, his movements sharp, angry. He was on solid ground here, in the world of broken machinery and quantifiable problems. For the next several hours, a tense silence filled the cockpit. Elias meditated, trying to sort through the chaotic library in his head, attempting to build mental walls to contain the flood of alien thoughts and memories. Kalen worked, rerouting power, patching damaged systems with emergency overrides, and trying to coax the ship's internal fabrication unit to print replacement parts from their limited stock of raw materials. The Nomad, under his tireless ministrations, slowly stabilized. The alarms ceased their shrieking, replaced by the steady, ominous hum of an overloaded system running on borrowed time. Finally, Kalen let out a long, exhausted breath. All right, I've bypassed the crystallized conduits. The reactor is stable, for now, but the jump drive is still a no-go. The stabilizers are made of a specific hafnium crystal alloy. We don't have the materials to fabricate them, and there's no substitute. And he pointed to a faint, rhythmic pulse he'd managed to isolate on the long-range comm scanner. And we have another problem. That blind jump we made, it wasn't clean. The energy signature from our little Grand Theft Fusion Core adventure is loud. Very loud. My guess is we tore a pretty ragged hole in space-time. That pulse is a hegemony deep space relay, about 2 systems away. It's an automated listening post, and it's pinging. Right now, it's just registering an anomaly, but it will keep scanning, refining the data, and sooner or later, it's going to get a lock on our exact position. I'd give us 12 hours standard, maybe less. The deadline hung in the air between them, heavy and absolute. Elias opened his eyes. The Oracle's data streams had settled slightly, and he had found a flicker of something useful, a fragment of a memory from an old human free trader captain from before the hegemony's rise. Zitari's Reach, Elias said, his voice clear and focused. It was an old, independent mining outpost in the next sector over, decommissioned a century ago after the mines ran dry. The hegemony just left it to rot. Scavengers used it as a shadow port for a while. They would have had workshops, spare parts for ships like ours. Kalen pulled up the old star charts, his fingers flying across the controls. He found the system, a bleak collection of rocks orbiting a dying red dwarf. "It's close," he admitted. "Too close to that relay for comfort, but we could get there with the sublight engines if we push them. But it's been abandoned for decades. Elias, it'll be picked clean." "Maybe," Elias countered, standing up and walking to the nav computer. "But those old outposts, they had protocols. In the event of a catastrophic failure, they would seal the deep storage workshops, emergency supplies, high-end fabrication materials, things they'd need to rebuild, things like hafnium crystal alloys. It's a long shot, K, but it's the only one we have." And he pointed to the map in his head, a map only he could see, and then translated it to the screen. "We can't jump, but we can skim the edge of that gas giant, use its gravity to slingshot us, cut the travel time in half. It'll strain the hull, but it'll get us there before that relay pinpoints us." Kalen stared at the proposed route, then at Elias, then back at the blinking red lights on his engineering console. It was a cascade of bad ideas, a plan built on hopes and ghost stories. But he was a man of logic, and the logic was inescapable. Staying here meant certain capture or death. Trying to jump meant certain, spectacular death. Their only path forward, however slim, was the one that led through Zatari's reach. "Fine," he finally conceded, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "We'll go to your ghost town, but you're not touching the helm. Your head is full of space magic, and I'll be damned if I'm letting you fly this ticking clock. I'll plot the course. You just tell me if your Oracle friend has any bright ideas on how to keep the ship from vibrating into its component atoms while we do it." A small, basically weary smile touched Elias's lips. "It's working on it." He placed a hand on the cool metal of the bulkhead, and for a moment, he felt a faint, sympathetic vibration from the ship itself, a silent acknowledgement. They were a strange symbiosis now, a broken man, a broken ship, and the ghost of a galaxy that refused to be forgotten, all hurtling towards a forgotten rock at the edge of hegemony space. The hunt was on, but for the first time, they weren't just running away, they were running towards a chance. The journey to Zatari's reach was a white-knuckle ballet of calculated risks. Kalen was a virtuoso at the helm, coaxing the crippled nomad through the gravity well of the gas giant with a surgeon's precision. The ship groaned and shuddered, hull plates screaming under the immense tidal forces, but he held her together. Elias acted as a strange co-pilot, his eyes closed in concentration. The Oracle's data streams provided him with a preternatural understanding of the ship's condition, allowing him to anticipate stresses and power fluctuations as before they became critical. Divert auxiliary power from aft life support to the port inertial dampener, he'd say, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "There's a micro-fracture forming in the support strut. We need to brace it." Kalen, his initial skepticism eroded by the uncanny accuracy of Elias's hunches, would comply without question, his fingers dancing over the controls. They were a bizarre two-man crew, one piloting by instrument and instinct, the other by a phantom sense of cosmic memory. They limped into the Zatari system with less than an hour to spare before the hegemony relay would have their definitive location. The outpost was a ghost, just as Kalen had predicted. It was an asteroid that had been hollowed out, a sprawling network of docks, habitats, and mining facilities carved deep into the rock, now silent and dark. Debris from old conflicts and scavenger disputes littered the space around it, a silent warning to visitors. No power signatures, no life signs, no active comms. Kalen reported, running a diagnostic sweep, It's as dead as the Indomitable. The main workshops were in the core, Elias said, pointing to a large, sealed docking bay that seemed less damaged than the others. Emergency power, independent of the primary grid. If anything survived, it'll be in there. Kalen guided the Nomad into the cavernous bay, the ship's landing strut settling onto the pockmarked deck with a weary sigh. The moment they powered down the main engines, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb, heavy and suffocating. They suited up and disembarked, their mag boots clanking ominously in the vast, empty space. The air was thin and smelled of cold metal and dust. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed at the edge of their vision. The place was a mess. It had been picked over, not just once, but probably dozens of times. Stripped consoles, open maintenance panels, and discarded tools littered the corridors. Faded graffiti from forgotten scavenger crews marked the walls like territorial scrawls. "See nothing," Kalen said, his voice a low grumble inside his helmet. "We came all this way for a scrap heap. The deep storage is shielded," Elias insisted, consulting the map in his head. "Lead-lined walls, pressure-sealed blast doors. Standard procedure for storing volatile materials. They wouldn't have been able to scan it. And cutting through would have taken more time and resources than most scavengers have. This way." He led them through a maze of dark, intersecting corridors, his steps sure and certain. He was following a path that hadn't been walked in a century, guided by the ghost of a long-dead outpost administrator. They arrived at a massive, circular blast door, 20 meters in diameter, its surface unscarred but covered in a thick layer of dust. There was no visible control panel, no keypad, no obvious way to open it. "Well, this is it," Kalen said, kicking a loose bolt on the floor. "End of the line. I hope you enjoyed the tour." Elias ignored him. He stepped forward and placed his gloved palm flat against the cold center of the door. He closed his eyes, filtering out the cacophony of the Oracle's broader memories and focusing on a single, specific stream: human engineering protocols, pre-hegemony security systems. He felt a faint, residual energy field within the door's locking mechanism. It was powered by a long-decay atomic battery, but it was still there, a whisper of its former self. He sent a focused pulse of bioelectric energy from his own body through the suit's glove, a specific frequency sequence that matched an emergency override code he hadn't known he knew a day ago. For a long second, nothing happened. Then, a faint click echoed from deep within the door's mechanism. A thin seam of light appeared around its circumference as ancient locking bolts, frozen in place for 100 years, slowly, painfully retracted. With a deep, resonant groan that shook the very asteroid beneath their feet, the great door began to slide open. Kalen stared, his mouth agape. "You have got to be kidding me." The air that wafted out of the opening was cold, clean, and sterile. The lights inside flickered on automatically, revealing a space that was the complete opposite of the decay outside. It was a pristine, untouched workshop. Advanced fabrication units, lathes, diagnostic arrays, and shelves stacked high with sealed containers of raw materials stood in perfect, orderly rows. It was a time capsule, a scavenger's dream of paradise. "Hafnium crystal alloy," Elias said, reading the script on one of the containers from across the room. "Enough to build a dozen jump drives." They worked with a feverish intensity, the ever-present threat of the hegemony of fire at their backs. While Kalen began the delicate, painstaking process of fabricating the new jump drive stabilizers, Elias explored the rest of the deep storage facility. It wasn't just a workshop, it was an archive. Tucked away in a shielded data vault, he found the outpost's operational logs, its crew manifests, its history. He ran his hand over the console, and the Oracle drank it all in, cross-referencing the information, filling in another tiny missing piece of the galactic puzzle. He learned that Zatari's reach hadn't been abandoned because the mines ran dry. It had been a center for the Terran resistance in the early days of the hegemony's expansion. It was a secret listening post, a supply depot for the scattered human fleet, and it had been betrayed, and the final log entry was from the outpost commander, a woman named Anya Sharma. It was a chillingly calm report detailing the arrival of a hegemony fleet, a fleet that knew exactly where to find them. She spoke of a compliance signal, a hidden code embedded in their communications that had broadcast their location. Before she could elaborate, the log ended abruptly. The hegemony hadn't just defeated them, they had used their own technology against them. The Oracle pulsed with a cold, analytical fury. It absorbed the new data, the concept of a hidden compliance signal resonating with information it already held. It began to run simulations, sifting through 2 centuries of hegemony technological doctrine. A terrifying new possibility began to take shape. "Kalen," Elias said, his voice grim as he walked back into the main workshop. "We have a bigger problem." "What? Bigger than a galactic empire that wants to dissect us?" Kalen shot back, not looking up from the delicate process of aligning the newly forged crystals in the stabilizer housing. "The hegemony didn't win the unification war just because they had bigger ships," Elias said. "They had an edge, something no one understood. The Oracle thinks it's found it. A compliance signal. A backdoor not just in our comms, but in our core technologies. Our jump drives, our reactors, our AIs. It's a latent code, a viral command that can be activated remotely. They can disable, or even control, any piece of human technology they choose." Kalen froze, the microscopic manipulator in his hand trembling slightly. He slowly looked up, the implications dawning on his face. "You're saying every human ship out there is a sleeper agent, potentially," Elias confirmed. "It explains how they dismantled our fleets so quickly. It's why they leave wrecks like the Indomitable behind. They're not just graves, they're traps. Anyone who tries to salvage the tech risks reactivating the signal, broadcasting their location. It's how they found us. The moment the Oracle brought that ship's systems online, it sent out a silent ping, a signal that said, 'I'm awake.'" The silence in the workshop was suddenly deafening. Every piece of equipment they were using, the very ship that was their only hope of escape, was potentially compromised. They were flying a Trojan horse through a galaxy owned by the enemy. "Can we find it?" Kalen asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The code. Can we remove it?" "The Oracle is working on an algorithm to scrub it," Elias replied. "But it needs processing power, more than the Nomad systems can provide. It needs access to a larger network. The Sanctuary." He looked at the newly fabricated stabilizers, gleaming on the workbench. "Finish the installation. We're getting out of here, but we're not just running anymore. We have to warn them. We have to get this information to the Sanctuary." As Kalen finished the final connections on the new jump drive, a proximity alert suddenly flashed on his wrist-mounted data pad, synced to the Nomad's dormant sensors. "Elias," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We've got company." They rushed back to the docking bay. Standing at the edge of the bay's energy shield, looking out into the void, they saw it. A single ship, small and angular, drifting silently towards the outpost. It wasn't hegemony. Its design was a hodgepodge of different manufacturers, its hull scarred and heavily modified. It was a scavenger ship, like their own. A comms request crackled through their helmets. A grainy, open-channel hail. "This is the Void Drifter hailing the unidentified vessel in the Zitari dock. We're not looking for trouble. Just saw your energy signature on our way through the system. Thought you might be friendly. The hegemony patrols these sectors pretty hard. It's not safe to be alone out here." Elias and Kalen exchanged a look. It could be a trap. Or it could be a rare, fleeting chance at an ally in a hostile universe. "What do we do?" Kalen asked. Before Elias could answer, the Oracle gave him a sharp, definitive mental nudge. It had been passively scanning the incoming ship's systems, and it had found something buried deep in its engine diagnostics. A familiar, faint echo. The same latent compliance signal, but it also found something else, a layered encryption key wrapped around the ship's comm system, a key that was Terran resistance in origin, old and highly sophisticated. "They do not know they are compromised," the Oracle communicated. "They are not your enemy. They are like you. They are ghosts. Let them in." "Open the bay door," Elias said, making his decision. "And power up the ship's shields, just in case. Let's see who's still brave enough to fly under a human flag in this part of the galaxy." The outer bay door slid open with a low groan, revealing the scarred and pragmatic form of the Void Drifter. It was a ship built for survival, not for beauty. Its hull a patchwork of mismatched plates and its engine array bristling with non-standard modifications. It settled onto the deck opposite the Nomad with the practiced ease of a vessel that had docked in 1,000 forgotten places. The airlock hissed open and 3 figures emerged, their movements cautious and economical. The lead figure was a tall woman, her face etched with the kind of lines that come from staring into the void for too long. She wore a patched, dark gray flight suit with no insignia, and a heavy-caliber pulse pistol was strapped low on her thigh. The two behind her were a study in contrasts, a wiry, young man whose eyes darted everywhere, taking in every detail, and a mountain of a man with a thick, graying beard who moved with a slow, deliberate calm. "I'm Captain Eva Rostova," the woman said, her voice clear and steady through their helmet comms as she stopped a respectful distance away. "This is my pilot, Jin, and my engineer, Gregor. You've got a lot of nerve running a rig this hot, this deep in hegemony territory." "We didn't have much of a choice," Elias replied, stepping forward with Kalen at his side. He kept his hands visible, away from his own sidearm. "I'm Elias Vance. This is Kalen. We were refueling." Rostova let out a short, humorless laugh. "Refueling your ship's energy signature is bright enough to be seen from the core worlds. It looks like you tried to swallow a star. That's not refueling. Vance, that's a distress call, eh?" She took a step closer, her gaze sweeping over the Nomad and then locking onto Elias. "I've been running these shadow routes for 20 years. I know every ghost and every drifter from here to the Outer Rim. I've never seen you before. So I'll ask again. What are you doing here?" The moment hung in the cold, still air of the docking bay. This was the precipice. He could lie, invent a story about a lucky salvage find, and they could part ways, 2 ships passing in the night. Or he could tell the truth and risk everything on the hope that these strangers, these fellow ghosts, were more than just survivors. The Oracle's presence was a quiet hum in the back of his mind, a silent, expectant observer. "We woke something up," Elias said, the words feeling heavy and irreversible. "Something the hegemony buried a long time ago, and it led us to a truth they've been hiding for 2 centuries. He told them everything. He told them about the indomitable, the oracle, and the impossible energy transfer. He spoke of the hegemony's systematic erasure of history, and then he told them about the compliance signal. As he spoke, he watched their faces. Jin's initial curiosity hardened into disbelief. Gregor's calm demeanor shifted to one of stony skepticism. Rostova's expression didn't change at all, but her eyes narrowed, searching his for any sign of deception or madness. "A back door," she said flatly when he was finished. "A magic kill switch hidden in every human ship ever built. That's your story." "It's not a story," Kalen interjected, his voice raw with the conviction of a man who had seen the impossible. "I saw the systems on the Nomad nearly tear themselves apart from the data surge. I just built a new jump drive from scratch. And I'm telling you, the theory is sound. A resonant frequency? A viral code buried in the firmware of the primary operating systems. It's not just possible. It's diabolically brilliant. It's a fairy tale to scare scavengers," Gregor rumbled, his deep voice vibrating with dismissal. "If the hegemony had such a weapon, why are we still flying? Why haven't they just switched us all off?" "Because you're not a threat," Elias said, the words landing like a physical blow. "We're scattered, disorganized. We're rats in the walls, not a revolution. They don't need to burn the house down to deal with a few rats. They just leave the traps baited. But the moment we try to organize, the moment we gather in one place, the moment we look like we're building something, they'll flip the switch and we'll all just drift away, dead in the water." He turned his gaze fully on Rostova. "Your ship has it. The signal. It's located in the secondary power regulator for your aft shield emitter, a dormant subroutine coded as a diagnostic failsafe. It's waiting for command that hasn't been sent yet." The specificity of his claim silenced them. Jin looked at Gregor, who stared back at Elias, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Only a ship's engineer would know the intimate details of such a minor, buried system. "Prove it," Rostova challenged, her hand drifting almost unconsciously towards the grip of her pistol. Elias closed his eyes, focusing. "Show them," the oracle responded, not with a command, but with a tool. A complex string of code, an exploit, bloomed in his mind. It wasn't a weapon, but a key. "Jin," Elias said, his eyes still closed. "Open your nav console's maintenance interface. Run a level 3 diagnostic on the engine's energy distribution network. When it asks for an override code, enter the following Epsilon 90 Kilo 47. Jin looked at his captain. Rostova gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The young pilot pulled out a data pad and, with a few taps, synced it with his ship's systems. His brow furrowed in concentration. "Running diagnostic. It's asking for an override. Inputting code now." He fell silent, his eyes widening as he stared at the screen. "Captain, what is this?" "Read it aloud," Rostova commanded, her eyes never leaving Elias. "It's a log," Jin stammered. "A communications log, encrypted. It's broadcasting a single data packet every 1,000 hours. A census, ship ID, location, crew complement, fuel status. It's reporting on us. It has been for years." The truth landed in the center of the docking bay with the force of a physical explosion. Their freedom, the one thing they had cherished and fought for, had been a lie. They were not ghosts the hegemony couldn't find. They were assets the hegemony hadn't bothered to collect. Gregor let out a string of curses, his face pale beneath his beard. Rostova was silent for a long moment, the revelation washing over her. The hard, cynical shell she had worn for 2 decades cracked, revealing a core of pure, cold fury. "Can you stop it?" she asked Elias, her voice low and dangerous. "Not from here," Elias replied. "The Oracle needs a network, a massive processing core, to build the algorithm that can scrub the signal clean. It knows where to find one. A place called the Sanctuary. That's where we were going." Rostova looked from the crippled nomad to her own compromised vessel. She looked at her crew, their faces a mixture of fear and rage. She had spent her life running, surviving, picking at the scraps of a galaxy that belonged to someone else. Elias Vance hadn't just brought her a problem, he had brought her a target, a reason. "All right, Vance," she said, a new, hard light in her eyes. "You've got yourself a new crew. The Drifter network is small, but we know the blind spots, the dead zones where hegemony patrols don't go. We'll get you to this sanctuary of yours." As the words of their new, fragile alliance settled, the universe chose that moment to remind them of its indifference. A piercing alarm blared from the Nomad's reactivated proximity sensors. Kalen scrambled up the ramp and into the cockpit. "It's them," he yelled, his voice strained. "One ship, Inquisitor class, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They're hailing the outpost." The hunt was over. They were cornered. Panic was a cold, sharp spike. But Rostova's command experience took over instantly. "They'll launch boarders. We can't fight an Inquisitor. We have to run. We can't outrun them. And we can't jump without them tracking our wake," Kalen countered, sliding back down the ramp. "We're trapped." "No," Elias said, a desperate plan forming in his mind, seated by the Oracle's tactical archives. "We don't outrun them. We blind them." He turned to Gregor and Kalen. "This outpost, its main reactor, is it still viable?" Gregor nodded slowly. "The core is dormant, but the fuel cells are intact." "Why?" "We're going to turn it into a flashbulb," Elias said, his voice crackling with urgency. "You two are going to bypass every safety protocol and overload the reactor, not to detonate it, but to create a massive, uncontrolled energy release. A plasma surge that will blind every sensor in the system for at least 30 seconds. He then turned to Rostova and Jin. "Just before the surge hits, you're going to launch. Punch a hole in space-time and jump to the coordinates I give you. Your energy signature, combined with the reactor surge, will be the perfect decoy. They'll think it's us, making a desperate run for it." "And what about you?" Rostova demanded. "Well, they're blinded and chasing you," Elias finished, a grim smile on his face. "The Nomad will be running cold. We'll detach from the dock, power down to minimal life support, and drift out the far side of the asteroid with the debris from the plasma surge. A ghost in a cloud of ghosts. By the time their sensors clear, we'll be gone." It was a plan born of pure desperation, a gamble with 1,000 ways to fail, but it was the only one they had. Without another word, they sprang into action. Kalen and Gregor disappeared into the asteroid's core, while Rostova and Jin prepped the Void Drifter for the most important jump of its life. Elias stood on the bridge of the Nomad, the map to the Calyx Nebula and the Sanctuary glowing in his mind. He fed a set of decoy coordinates to Rostova, a path that would lead them on a wild goose chase before doubling back to a prearranged rendezvous point. "Reactor core is critical." Kalen's voice crackled over the comms. "Surge in 30 seconds. "We're ready." Rostova's voice came back, calm and steady. "Good luck, Vance." You too, Captain, Elias replied. Make some noise for us. He watched on the external sensors as the Inquisitor grew larger, a sliver of malevolent grace against the black. He saw the flicker of its launch bays opening. Then, the outpost reactor blew, not in an explosion of fire, but in a silent, brilliant eruption of pure white energy. Every screen went to static. The Void Drifter launched into that wall of light and vanished in a flash of quantum distortion. Elias hit the controls, releasing the docking clamps. The Nomad shuddered and began to drift, a dead thing floating free. He cut all power except for the barest trickle needed to keep the air breathable. The ship went dark and cold. For what felt like an eternity, they floated in absolute silence. Piece of junk among 1,000 others. Their fate in the hands of physics and luck. Then, Kalen's voice, a hushed whisper from the engineering station. Sensors are clearing. The Inquisitor. It took the bait. It's turning. It's following the decoy's jump signature. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked out the viewport. The Inquisitor, its predatory form now distant, adjusted its course and, with a silent flash, vanished, chasing a phantom. They were alone. He powered up the engines, the low hum a song of defiance. He laid in the course for the Calyx Nebula. They were still hunted, till outnumbered, till flying a broken ship held together with hope and rust. But something had changed. They were no longer just running. They were carrying a weapon, a truth that could unravel an empire. On the nav screen, the distant, swirling colors of the nebula looked like a promise. The stars ahead were no longer a void to hide in, but a battleground waiting for its spark. And deep in the heart of the Nomad, the Oracle was silent, ashantley holding the memory of a galaxy that was waiting to be reborn.